The training deck was too large for comfort and too quiet for a place designed to simulate war. Its metallic floor stretched beneath Lyra's boots like an endless, judgmental mirror, reflecting every slight hesitation in her movement. Overhead, pale white light hummed softly, casting no shadows. There was nowhere to hide here, not even in darkness. She stood at the edge of the arena, shoulders drawn tighter than she intended, fingers brushing nervously against the smooth fabric of her uniform. Across the observation tier, figures gathered behind transparent alloy panels, their silhouettes blurred but unmistakably attentive. She did not need to see their faces to feel them watching. She knew those looks, the careful neutrality, the polite expectation of failure. Lyra inhaled slowly, her long ears catching the faint mechanical rhythm of the station systems, the distant thrum of gravity stabilizers, the soft hiss of oxygen cycling through vents, even the quiet clicking of distant training drones resetting themselves. Everything moved forward. Everything functioned exactly as it should, except her. "Princess," the voice came from behind her, casual, unceremonious. Lyra turned, her posture instinctively straightening as though an invisible weight had been placed along her spine. The human stood a few steps away, one hand loosely holding a standard pulse rifle, the other adjusting the cuff of his worn sleeve. He did not bow. He did not salute. He did not even look particularly impressed. "You may address me as Lyra," she said, carefully measured, as she had been taught. He considered this for a moment, then nodded once. "All right, Lyra." That was it. No formal acknowledgement. No drawn-out respect. Just acceptance. Simple and immediate, like adjusting the brightness on a screen. It was disorienting. "I am Bren," he added, almost as an afterthought, as if names were minor, technical details rather than declarations of identity. "I am aware," Lyra replied, then immediately regretted how stiff it sounded. The sentence landed between them like an object dropped without purpose. Bren blinked once. "Good. Saves time." She wasn't sure if that was humor. Before she could decide, he extended the rifle toward her. "You've used one of these before?" Lyra hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I have completed theoretical and practical examinations with high distinction." "Great," he said. "Show me." There was no ceremony, no briefing, no sequence of expectations laid out in advance. Just the weapon held out plainly, waiting. Lyra took it, the weight settling into her hands with familiar precision. This part she understood. The structure, the grip, the alignment of sight and target. She adjusted her stance, recalling the exact angle her instructors had drilled into her. The exact distribution of weight, the exact... "Too stiff," Bren said. She froze. "I have not yet..." "Yeah, I know," he interrupted lightly. "That's the problem. You're preparing to prepare. Just stand." "I am standing." "Not like that. You look like someone told you standing wrong is illegal." Lyra stared at him, unsure whether to be offended or confused. Possibly both. He stepped closer, not invading her space so much as ignoring the concept of it entirely, and nudged her shoulder slightly. "Relax. You're not a statue." "I am not attempting to be a statue," she said, though her tone suggested she might reconsider if it would improve her performance. "Could have fooled me." A pause stretched between them. Then unexpectedly, Bren smirked, just slightly, just enough to shift the atmosphere by a fraction. "All right," he said. "Try again. But this time don't think about how you're supposed to stand. Just stand." "That is contradictory. Welcome to training." Lyra exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the rifle before she consciously forced it to loosen. She adjusted her feet, not to the exact measurements she had memorized, but to what felt stable. It was unfamiliar, unstructured, uncomfortable. "Better," Bren said. She glanced at him, surprised. "You have not even evaluated my aim. One thing at a time." That at least made sense. She turned back toward the target drones, their metallic surfaces gleaming faintly as they hovered at varying distances. Her finger rested near the trigger. Her breathing slowed. She fired. The shot hit the outer edge of the target, not the center. A failure. She felt it immediately, the familiar tightening in her chest, the quiet confirmation of every expectation placed upon her. Behind her, Bren spoke. Again! No disappointment, no correction, just again. Lyra blinked, then adjusted her aim and fired once more. Closer. Again! The third shot struck near the center. She lowered the rifle slightly, waiting. There was always a moment here, in every training session she had ever known, where the instructor would step in. Correct. Analyze. Explain the flaw in her posture, her breathing, her existence. Bren did none of those things. Instead, he nodded once. Good. Now do it 10 more times. Lyra stared at him. Without further instruction? Yeah. But how will I improve? He shrugged. By doing it again. She hesitated, then looked back at the targets. There was something absurd about it, something almost laughably simple. She fired again. And again. And again. By the sixth shot, her stance had shifted without her noticing. By the eighth, her breathing had found a rhythm that did not feel forced. By the 10th, she realized something quietly unsettling. She had stopped thinking about how she was supposed to be, and for the first time, the rifle felt lighter in her hands. Behind her, Bren crossed his arms, watching with an expression that was neither impressed nor disappointed. Just patient. See? He said after a moment. Not a statue. Lyra lowered the rifle, her lips parting slightly as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, something unexpected rose in her chest, something unfamiliar and almost ridiculous. It felt suspiciously like the beginning of confidence. She was not entirely sure what to do with that, so she did the only thing that made sense. She lifted the rifle again and fired. The obstacle course looked less like a training path and more like a deliberate insult. Segmented platforms floated at uneven heights, shifting just enough to make every step uncertain. Thin beams of energy cut across the space in unpredictable intervals, while hovering drones drifted lazily overhead, as if waiting for someone to embarrass themselves. Lyra stood at the starting line, staring at the course as though it might rearrange itself into something reasonable if she waited long enough. It won't, Bren said from behind her. She didn't turn. I did not say anything. You didn't have to. You have a very expressive, standing posture. That is not a compliment. Didn't say it was. She exhaled slowly, adjusting her gloves. I have studied this course. I understand its structure. Great, Bren replied. Now forget it. She turned this time, her expression sharpening. That would defeat the purpose of studying. Only if studying worked. It does work. Then why are you still standing here? Lyra opened her mouth, then paused. That was annoyingly difficult to answer. Bren stepped past her, crouching briefly to check the magnetic grip on his boots before straightening again. Look, he said, gesturing toward the floating platforms. You know what it's supposed to be. That's fine. But the course doesn't care what you know. It just cares what you do. That is an overly simplistic interpretation. Yep. She narrowed her eyes slightly. And yet, you expect it to be effective. Also, yep. There was a beat of silence. Then Bren tilted his head toward the starting line. Go on. Lyra hesitated, then stepped forward. The moment her boot crossed the threshold, the course activated with a low mechanical hum. Platforms shifted slightly, drones adjusted their altitude, and the thin energy beams flickered into motion. She took her first step onto the nearest platform. It moved. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough to disrupt the precise calculations she had made. Her balance faltered, and she corrected too quickly, her body overcompensating in a way that felt painfully familiar. Relax, Bren called. I am relaxed, she replied, her voice tight. You look like you're negotiating with gravity. I am maintaining control. Gravity's winning. She ignored him and pushed forward, leaping to the next platform. This time she landed more cleanly, though her arms lifted slightly to steady herself. The next jump required more distance. She adjusted, calculated, executed. Her foot clipped the edge. For a brief, humiliating moment, she windmilled her arms in a way that would have been impressive if it had been intentional. Then she dropped to one knee, catching herself just before losing balance entirely. Above her, one of the drones emitted a soft chirp, as if politely acknowledging her effort. I dislike that machine, Lyra muttered. It likes you, Bren said. You're giving it good data. That is not comforting. She stood again, brushing invisible dust from her uniform, and continued. The course did not become easier, but something shifted. Not in the platforms, not in the beams, but in her approach. She stopped trying to predict every movement, stopped calculating every possibility before acting. Instead, she reacted. When a beam of energy cut across her path, she ducked without overthinking it. When a platform shifted, she adjusted mid-step instead of freezing. It was messy. It was imperfect. It worked. Halfway through the course, she misjudged a jump and landed awkwardly, her foot sliding dangerously close to the edge. For a moment she hung there, balance teetering between recovery and failure. Bren didn't shout instructions. He didn't step in. He just watched. Lyra inhaled sharply, then shifted her weight. Not the way she had been taught, not the way she had practiced, but the way that felt right in that exact moment. She stabilized. Good, Bren said, as if she had merely completed a routine step. She continued. By the time she reached the final platform, her breathing had changed. It was no longer controlled in the rigid, deliberate way she had learned, but steady in a way that felt natural. Her movements were still not elegant, not by the standards of the court, but they were effective. She made the final jump and landed. For a second, she didn't move. She simply stood there, processing the fact that she had reached the end without falling, without stopping, without... Well, Bren said, walking up beside her, you survived. Lyra turned to him, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and cautious satisfaction. That is your evaluation? It's a good one. I did not perform flawlessly. No one does. She hesitated. In the court, we are expected to. Yeah, Bren said. That sounds exhausting. She blinked. It is. He nodded, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he gestured back toward the course. Go again. Lyra stared at him. Immediately? Yep. I have just completed the course. And now you'll do it better. She looked back at the shifting platforms, the flickering beams, the hovering drones that seemed almost eager for another attempt. A part of her wanted to argue, to request a pause, to analyze what she had done wrong and how she might correct it before trying again. Instead, she found herself asking, if I fail? Bren shrugged. Then you'll fail faster next time. That was, without question, the least reassuring thing he could have said. And yet, Lyra stepped forward. The course activated again, the hum of machinery rising to meet her as she crossed the threshold. This time, when the first platform shifted beneath her, she didn't hesitate. She adjusted and kept moving. The training hall smelled faintly of ozone and overheated circuitry, which Bren insisted was the scent of progress, and Lyra privately believed was the scent of something about to explode. Rows of hovering drones lined the far wall, their lenses dimmed but attentive, like a collection of silent witnesses waiting for something entertaining to happen. You're going to like this, Bren said. I doubt that, Lyra replied immediately. That's because you haven't tried it yet. That has never improved my opinion of anything. He gave a small shrug. Fair. He tapped a panel beside the wall, and the drones flickered to life, their lenses glowing a soft amber. They rose in unison, drifting into the air, with a quiet mechanical grace that felt almost deliberate. Lyra's long ears tilted slightly as she tracked their movement. What is their function? They shoot at you? She paused. I would like to revise my earlier statement. I do not like this. They don't shoot to injure, Bren added. Just sting a little. That is not a meaningful distinction. It is if you've experienced both. The drones spread out, forming a loose perimeter around the training zone. Their movements were not synchronized, not predictable. Each one drifted independently, adjusting altitude and position with subtle variations that made them difficult to track all at once. Lyra shifted her stance, her fingers tightening slightly around the training baton she had been given instead of a rifle. And my objective? Don't get hit. She looked at him. That is extremely vague. It's also extremely clear. That is contradictory. Welcome back to training. Before she could respond, one of the drones emitted a sharp pulse of light. A fraction of a second later, a small burst of energy struck the ground near her feet with a soft crack. Lyra jumped back, more startled than she intended. Good reaction, Bren said. Bit dramatic, but we'll refine it. I was not being dramatic. You left the ground entirely. That was a tactical repositioning. Sure. Another pulse came, this time from her left. Lyra twisted, narrowly avoiding the shot as it skimmed past her shoulder. The drones adjusted immediately, their movements tightening, their aim becoming more deliberate. She moved, not with the rigid precision she had been taught, but with something quicker, more instinctive. She ducked under one shot, sidestepped another, her boots scraping lightly against the metallic floor as she adjusted her balance. Then one hit her. It struck her upper arm with a sharp, stinging impact that made her flinch. She froze. Don't stop, Bren called. I have been struck. Yeah, it happens. Keep moving. She hesitated, her mind briefly caught in the familiar loop of analysis. What had she done wrong? How had she miscalculated? What corrections should she? Another shot hit the ground near her feet. Lyra moved again. This time she didn't pause when the next shot grazed her side. It stung, sharp and immediate, but she kept going, her movements becoming less about avoiding every single shot and more about not letting any one of them stop her. The drones adapted. They always adapted. Their patterns shifted, their timing changing just enough to keep her off balance. One dipped lower than the others, forcing her to jump over a shot instead of ducking. Another held position longer than expected, delaying its attack just enough to catch her mid-step. It was frustrating. It was unpredictable. It was almost engaging. You're thinking again, Bren said. I am always thinking. Try less. That is not how thinking works. Then think faster. She almost laughed at that, the absurdity of it cutting through the tension just enough to loosen something in her chest. Instead, she adjusted her stance, her movements becoming sharper, less hesitant. A drone fired. She shifted. Another fired. She pivoted. A third. She stepped forward instead of back, closing the distance just enough to throw off its targeting. The shot missed entirely, passing behind her in a faint trail of light. She blinked. That was new, Bren said. I did not plan it. Good. Another shot came, and this time she didn't wait for it. She moved first, her body reacting before her mind could fully process the decision. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't controlled in the way she had been taught, but it worked. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. It was difficult to tell. By the time Bren tapped the panel again and the drones powered down, Lyra was breathing harder than she had during the obstacle course, her muscles tense but not rigid, her stance uneven but stable. She lowered the baton slightly, her gaze following the drones as they returned to their positions along the wall. I was struck multiple times, she said. Yeah. That indicates failure. Bren shook his head. No, it indicates you got hit. That is the same thing. Not really. You kept moving. She considered that, her expression shifting slightly. In the court, being struck is unacceptable. In the field, stopping is worse. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Your standards are unusual. Your standards are impossible. That is the point. Yeah, Bren said. And how's that working out for you? She opened her mouth and closed it again. There was a pause. Then unexpectedly, Lyra let out a small, quiet breath that almost resembled a laugh. I believe, she said carefully, that your methods are highly inefficient. Bren nodded. I get that a lot. And yet, she added, glancing back at the drones, they appear to be effective. Also get that a lot. She looked at him for a moment, then down at her hands, then back at the training floor. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, she lifted the baton again. Again? Bren asked. Lyra tilted her head slightly, her long ears shifting with the motion. If I am to fail, she said, I would prefer to do so with greater consistency. Bren grinned, just a little. Now you're getting it. He tapped the panel. The drones lit up once more. And this time, when the first shot came, Lyra was already moving. The arena for joint exercises was louder than the previous training halls, filled with overlapping voices, shifting machinery, and the constant hum of active simulations. Unlike the quiet precision of Lyra's earlier sessions, This place felt alive, unpredictable in a way that suggested things could go wrong at any moment, and often did. Lyra stood at the edge of the staging zone, her gaze scanning the other trainees. They moved with a confidence she recognized, though it no longer felt as distant as it once had. Some of them glanced in her direction, their expressions varying between curiosity and something less generous. "She's the royal one," someone muttered, not quite quietly enough. "I thought she wasn't supposed to be here. Maybe this is ceremonial." Lyra heard every word. Her long ears made that unavoidable. Bren, standing beside her, also heard them. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he checked the power setting on his rifle, then glanced at Lyra. "You ready?" She hesitated. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether this exercise is designed to expose my inadequacies in front of a larger audience." Bren considered that. "Probably, yeah." "That is not encouraging." "Good," he said. "You won't get comfortable." She exhaled slowly. "I was not in danger of that." A sharp tone echoed across the arena as the simulation initialized. The environment shifted, metallic walls dissolving into a projection of a fractured urban landscape, collapsed structures, uneven terrain, and narrow passageways filled with drifting dust and flickering light. The air even carried a faint scent of burned circuitry, which Bren described as a nice touch, and Lyra described as completely unnecessary. Teams were assigned quickly. Lyra found herself grouped with 3 other trainees, 2 from her own species and 1 from a different allied world. Their expressions were polite but distant, their movements coordinated in a way that made her feel, briefly, like an outsider again. Bren stood just outside the team formation, observing. "Objective is simple," one of the trainees said. "Secure the central node and maintain position." "That is rarely simple," Lyra replied. "It is if everyone performs correctly." There was a subtle emphasis on the last word. Bren spoke before Lyra could respond. "It's simple until it isn't. Then it gets interesting." The trainee looked at him, unimpressed. "We are not here for interesting." Bren shrugged. "That's usually when it shows up." The signal sounded. The team moved. At first, Lyra followed their lead, matching their pace, their formation, their carefully practiced movements. It was efficient, predictable, controlled. It was also slow. She noticed it immediately, though she said nothing. The others advanced cautiously, scanning every angle, checking every corner. It was correct. It was also exactly what the simulation expected. A drone appeared ahead, emerging from the fractured remains of a structure. The team reacted instantly, firing in coordinated bursts that neutralized the threat before it could fully engage. "Maintain formation," the lead trainee said. Lyra nodded, but her attention shifted. There was a narrow passage to the right, partially collapsed, difficult to navigate, and entirely ignored by the team's current path. She hesitated. Then she remembered Bren's voice. "Don't think so much." Before she could reconsider, she moved. "Lyra," one of the trainees called. "Stay in formation." "I am adjusting position," she replied, already stepping into the narrower path. "This is not part of the plan." "Then the plan may require revision." "That is not your decision." Bren's voice cut in, calm but clear. "Let her try." The trainee looked at him. "If she fails." "She'll fail," Bren said. "Then we'll know." That was once again not reassuring. Lyra moved through the passage, her steps careful but not hesitant. The space was tighter, forcing her to adjust her posture, her movements becoming more fluid out of necessity rather than instruction. A drone emerged suddenly, closer than expected. She reacted, not perfectly, not elegantly, but quickly. The shot hit the drone's side, disabling it just enough for it to drop from the air. She didn't stop. The passage opened into a secondary approach to the central node, one that bypassed the heavily guarded main route. For a brief moment, Lyra simply stood there, processing what she had done. Then she heard the others. "Multiple hostiles ahead. Main route is blocked." Lyra looked at the node, then back toward the sounds of the team struggling against the expected path. Then she moved again. By the time the others broke through, they found her already at the objective. Her stance uneven but steady, her rifle lowered slightly as the last drone powered down. There was a pause. The lead trainee stared at her. You abandoned formation. I adapted. That was not your role. Lyra hesitated, then said, "It was necessary." Bren stepped forward, glancing between them. "Objectives are secured, right?" "Yes," the trainee admitted. "Then it worked." "That is not how—" "It is exactly how," Bren interrupted, his tone still calm, but firmer now. "You had a plan. It didn't work. She tried something else. It did." The trainee fell silent. Lyra stood there, unsure whether she had done something right or simply avoided doing something wrong. Above them in the observation tier, Queen Hessa watched without moving. Her gaze followed her daughter, not the uncertain girl she had trained, but the one standing now, slightly out of formation, slightly out of expectation. Different. Below, Bren glanced at Lyra, then nodded once. "Not bad," Lyra blinked. "I deviated from protocol." "Yeah. I caused disruption within the team structure." "Also true." She tilted her head slightly. "And yet you are not displeased." Bren considered that. "Nope." There was a pause. Then quietly Lyra said, "I believe I am beginning to understand your methods." Bren smiled faintly. "That's dangerous." "I have been informed of that." She looked back at the central node, then at the path she had taken. For once, the silence around her did not feel like judgment. It felt like possibility. The next training cycle began with silence, which Bren claimed was always suspicious. Lyra did not argue, mostly because she was beginning to suspect he was right about things she preferred him not to be right about. They stood inside a smaller simulation chamber, one designed not for speed or reaction, but for coordination. The walls shimmered faintly, waiting for input. No drones hovered. No platforms shifted. It was, at first glance, almost peaceful. "I do not trust this," Lyra said. "Good," Bren replied. "You're learning." "That is not reassuring." "It's not supposed to be." He tapped the console, and the room transformed instantly. The floor dissolved into a layered terrain of fractured surfaces and narrow ridges, while faint projections of allied units flickered into existence around them. Holographic teammates, each assigned a position, each waiting for direction. Lyra's ears tilted slightly as she processed the data streams feeding into her visor. "This is a command simulation." "Yep. I was not informed I would be leading." "You weren't." She turned to him. "Then why—" "You're not leading," Bren said. "You're just the one making decisions." "That is the definition of leading." "Not officially." "That distinction is meaningless." "Welcome to reality." She stared at him for a moment, then looked back at the projections. The units were already shifting slightly, their positioning unstable without clear instruction. The system would not wait for her to feel prepared. It never did. "Objective?" she asked. "Hold the ridge. Keep your team intact." "That is vague. Also accurate." Lyra exhaled slowly. "You have a remarkable ability to provide incomplete information." "I try." She almost smiled. The first wave appeared without warning. Enemy constructs emerging from the far edge of the terrain, their forms sharp and angular, moving with coordinated precision. The holographic allies reacted immediately, but without direction, their movements lacked cohesion. Lyra hesitated, then she spoke. "Shift left flank. Maintain elevation. Do not engage until they cross the second ridge." The units adjusted. Not perfectly, not instantly, but enough. The enemy advanced, their formation tightening as they approached. Lyra tracked their movement, her mind racing through possibilities, outcomes, probabilities. "Too slow," Bren said quietly. "I am calculating." "Don't. That is not helpful." "They're not calculating. They're moving." She watched the enemy units, their approach steady, relentless. There was no pause, no hesitation, so she stopped waiting. "Engage now," she said, her voice sharper this time. The units fired. The first exchange was messy. Not all shots landed. One of the holographic allies faltered, its projection flickering as it took simulated damage. Lyra felt the instinct to correct everything at once, to adjust every position, to refine every movement. Instead, she focused. Right flank, advance 2 steps, center, hold, left, rotate. The commands came faster now, less refined but more immediate. The units responded, their formations stabilizing as the engagement continued. Bren watched, arms crossed, saying nothing, which was somehow more unsettling than when he did. A sudden shift in the enemy pattern caught her attention. Two units broke formation, moving along a lower path toward the ridge's base. "They are attempting to flank," she said. "Yeah," Bren replied. "Rude." Lyra ignored him, her focus narrowing. "Center, suppress forward units. Left flank, disengage and intercept lower path." The left units hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Now," she added. They moved. The interception wasn't clean. One unit flickered heavily before stabilizing, but the enemy advance slowed, then stopped. Lyra adjusted again, her commands coming quicker, more instinctive. She was no longer trying to control everything. She was guiding. It felt different. Less like holding something fragile, more like shaping something fluid. The final enemy unit fell, its projection dissolving into static. Silence returned. The terrain faded, the chamber resetting to its original state. Lyra lowered her hands, though she hadn't realized she had raised them slightly during the simulation. "That was inefficient," she said after a moment. "Yeah," Bren replied. "There were multiple errors in positioning and response time." "Also true," she glanced at him. "And yet the objective was achieved." "Yep." She hesitated. "You are not going to explain what I did wrong." He shook his head. "You already know." That was, irritatingly accurate. She looked back at the empty chamber, replaying the simulation in her mind. The mistakes were there, clear and undeniable. But so was something else. Progress. "I was not following a structured command sequence," she said. "Nope. I was not adhering to optimal tactical doctrine. Definitely not." She tilted her head slightly. "And yet the outcome was successful." Bren nodded. "That's the part that matters." She considered that, her expression thoughtful. In the court, success without perfection is often regarded as insufficient. In the field, success is success. That seems overly forgiving. It's practical. She let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh. "Your approach lacks elegance." "Yeah," he said, "but it works." There was a pause. Then Lyra straightened slightly, her posture still not perfect, but no longer rigid. "Again," she said. Bren raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I made errors." "You always will." "Then I will make fewer." He smiled just a little. "That's the idea." He tapped the console again. The room shifted. This time, when the simulation began, Lyra did not wait for the system to demand her input. She was already speaking. And for the first time, it did not feel like she was trying to become the warrior she was expected to be. It felt like she was becoming something else. Something her own. The final evaluation was announced without ceremony, which Bren described as a bad sign wrapped in efficiency. Lyra did not ask what that meant. She had learned that his explanations often created more questions than answers. The staging bay was larger than any of the previous training areas, its ceiling stretching high enough to house full-scale simulation constructs. Rows of trainees stood in quiet formation, their usual conversations reduced to low murmurs. Even the air felt different, thicker, as if the station itself was waiting. "This is unnecessary," Lyra said quietly. "What is?" Bren asked. "The tension." "Ah," he nodded. "Yeah, that's included at no extra cost." She glanced at him. "You are not concerned." "I am," he said. "I just don't look like it." "That seems inefficient." "It saves energy." Before she could respond, the signal sounded. The simulation activated instantly. The ground beneath them shifted, solid metal dissolving into uneven terrain, scattered with debris and fractured structures. The sky above, if it could be called that, darkened into a deep artificial twilight, punctuated by distant flashes of simulated conflict. "This is new," Lyra said. "Yeah," Bren replied. "They're trying harder." The briefing came through their comms, concise and unhelpfully broad. Multi-objective scenario, dynamic threats, adaptive enemy behavior. In other words, nothing would stay predictable. "Stick close," Bren said. "I thought you preferred independence." "I do," he said, "but I also prefer not losing my trainee on the first minute." That is a low expectation. It's realistic. They moved. The first wave hit faster than expected. Enemy units emerging from multiple directions. Their movements coordinated in a way that suggested the system had learned from previous exercises. Lyra reacted immediately, her rifle already raised. She fired. The shot landed cleanly. No hesitation. No pause. Another unit advanced from the right. She shifted, adjusting her stance mid-motion, her balance holding even as the ground beneath her sloped unevenly. Left, Bren said. I see it, she replied. She moved before he finished speaking. The engagement intensified, the battlefield shifting as new obstacles formed, forcing constant adjustment. Lyra found herself navigating not just the enemy, but the terrain itself. Stepping over fractured surfaces, ducking under unstable structures, adapting without needing to stop and think through every movement. At one point, a section of the ground collapsed beneath her. She didn't fall. She jumped. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but effectively. She landed on a lower platform, her knees bending to absorb the impact, her rifle already tracking the next target. Okay, Bren said over comms. That was either planned or very lucky. It was neither, Lyra replied. Impressive. She almost smiled. The objectives shifted mid-simulation, forcing them toward a central structure partially obscured by debris. Other trainees converged as well, their movements less coordinated than before, the increasing complexity of the scenario exposing weaknesses in their formations. Lyra noticed it immediately. They are slowing, she said. Yeah, Bren replied. Too much thinking. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then she acted. Move through the right passage, she called out, her voice cutting through the comms. The main route is unstable. One of the trainees responded, uncertain. That is not the designated path. It is faster. That is not confirmed. It will be, she said. There was a pause, then, unexpectedly, they followed. Bren glanced at her, something like quiet approval in his expression. You're getting bold. I am being efficient. Sure. They pushed through the narrower path, the terrain forcing them into closer proximity. Enemy units attempted to intercept, but the confined space limited their movement, reducing their advantage. Lyra adjusted quickly. Hold position. Let them come closer. That increases risk, one trainee said. It reduces variables, she replied. That is not reassuring. It is effective. The enemy advanced. Lyra waited, not because she hesitated, but because she chose to. Now, the team fired. The result was immediate. The closer range increased accuracy, the coordinated timing overwhelming the advancing units before they could fully engage. For a moment, the path cleared. They moved again. By the time they reached the central structure, Lyra's breathing was steady, her movements no longer carrying the tension that had once defined them. She still made small errors, a step slightly off, a shot slightly delayed, but they no longer stopped her. They no longer defined her. The final objective triggered. A large enemy construct emerged, its form towering, its movements slower, but far more powerful. The ground trembled slightly with each step, the simulation pushing the limits of scale. That seems excessive, Lyra said. Yeah, Bren replied. They like dramatic endings. The construct advanced, its targeting systems locking onto multiple positions. Lyra didn't wait. Disperse, she said. Maintain distance. Do not cluster. The team moved. The construct fired, its attacks wide and destructive, forcing constant repositioning. Lyra tracked its movement, her mind working not to calculate every possibility, but to recognize patterns. There. A delay between targeting cycles, a slight shift before each attack. She moved. Right side, draw its focus, she said. Center, prepare to engage when it turns. Are you certain? No, she said. Move. They did. The construct adjusted, its attention shifting just enough. Now. The team fired, concentrated shots striking the same point in rapid succession. The construct staggered. For a brief moment, everything aligned. Then it collapsed, its form dissolving into static. Silence followed. The simulation ended. The terrain faded, the artificial sky dissolving back into the neutral light of the staging bay. Lyra lowered her rifle slowly, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. No one spoke. Not immediately. Then Bren stepped closer, removing his gloves as he looked at her. "Well," he said, "you didn't fail." Lyra tilted her head slightly. "That is still your standard? It's a good one." She considered that, then glanced at the other trainees, then back at the space where the construct had stood. "I made errors," she said. "Yeah. I deviated from optimal strategies." "Definitely," she looked at him, "and yet the outcome was successful." He nodded. "That's the part that matters." There was a pause. Then quietly Lyra said, "I did not become what I was expected to be." Bren shrugged. "Good." She blinked. "Good?" "Yeah," he said. "That would have been boring." For a moment she said nothing. Then unexpectedly, she let out a small breath that carried the faintest trace of laughter. "I believe," she said, "that your definition of success is highly unconventional." "Yeah," Bren replied, "but it works." Lyra looked forward again, her posture steady, her movements no longer uncertain. For the first time, the silence around her did not feel like something to overcome. It felt like something she had earned. The station felt quieter after the evaluation, though nothing had actually changed. The same systems hummed, the same lights glowed, the same distant machinery carried on without pause. But something in the rhythm had shifted, or perhaps Lyra had. She stood alone on one of the upper observation platforms, looking down at the training deck where everything had begun. The metallic floor no longer seemed endless. It simply looked like a place where things happened. "You're standing differently." She didn't turn. "I have been informed of that." Bren stepped beside her, leaning lightly against the railing. "You're not trying to look like you belong here anymore." Lyra considered that. "I believe I do belong here." "Yeah," he said. "That's the difference." There was a pause, the kind that no longer felt heavy. Below them, new trainees moved through the obstacle course, their steps uncertain, their movements stiff. One of them tripped over nothing. Lyra watched closely. "That was an impressive failure." Bren glanced at her. "You're enjoying this?" "I am observing." "Sure." Another trainee hesitated before a jump, calculating, delaying. Lyra tilted her head slightly. "They are thinking too much." Bren smirked. "That sound familiar?" She did not answer immediately, then quietly, "Yes." A soft signal echoed through the station, indicating the end of the training cycle. Movement slowed below, the exercises coming to a close. Footsteps approached behind them. Lyra turned this time. Queen Hessa stood at the edge of the platform, her posture as composed as ever, her presence carrying the same quiet authority that had shaped Lyra's entire life. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Bren straightened slightly, then nodded once in acknowledgement. Not a bow, just a nod. Hessa's gaze flickered to him briefly, then returned to her daughter. "You move differently," the queen said. It was not a question. Lyra held her gaze. "Yes. You did not follow the form you were taught." "No." Hessa stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You broke formation. You deviated from protocol. You made decisions without full calculation." "Yes." Each word landed with quiet certainty. For a moment the silence stretched, filled with everything that had once remained unspoken between them. Then Hessa said, "And yet, you succeeded." Lyra hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because the answer felt different now. "Yes," she said. The queen studied her, not as a ruler assessing a subject, but as something far more complicated. "I trained you to be precise," Hessa said, "controlled, flawless. I know, and you are none of those things." There was no accusation in her tone. Lyra exhaled softly. "No." A faint shift crossed Hessa's expression, something subtle and difficult to name. "I watched you," she said, "from the beginning." Lyra's ears tilted slightly. "I was aware. You were not improving in the way I expected." "I know. And yet," Hessa continued, her voice quieter now, "you became something I did not anticipate." Lyra did not look away. "I think I stopped trying to become what I was supposed to be." There was a brief pause. Then unexpectedly, Bren spoke. Yeah, he said. That usually helps. Both of them glanced at him. He shrugged. What? It's a pattern. For a moment it seemed like Hessa might object. Instead she let out a slow breath. I believed, she said, that I had failed you. Lyra's expression shifted, just slightly. You did not. I gave you everything I knew. And it was valuable. Hessa's gaze softened, though only by a fraction. It was not enough. Lyra stepped closer, her posture steady, not rigid. It was not what I needed, she said, but it is part of what I am. The words settled between them, not as a correction, but as a completion. Hessa looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I see that now. Silence followed, but it was no longer uncertain. Below them, the training deck cleared, the last of the exercises concluding. Bren pushed himself off the railing. Well, and he said, this is the part where I pretend I planned all of this. Lyra glanced at him. You did not? Definitely not. Hessa's gaze shifted to him again. You trained her. Yeah. In a manner inconsistent with our traditions. Also, yeah. There was a pause. Then Hessa said, thank you. Bren blinked. Huh. He seemed to consider responding with something more elaborate, then simply nodded. You're welcome. Lyra watched this exchange, something quiet settling into place within her. The uncertainty that had once followed her, the constant awareness of not being enough, not being correct, not being what was expected. It was still there, but it no longer held the same weight. It no longer defined her. I will continue training, she said. Bren smiled slightly. Good. Hessa inclined her head. As you should. Lyra looked down at the training deck one last time, then back at them. I think, she said, I will fail again. Bren nodded. Definitely. Hessa's expression remained calm. That is acceptable. Lyra let out a small breath, something lighter than before. Then I will continue. She turned, her steps steady as she moved toward the exit. Not perfect, not flawless, but entirely her own. Behind her, Bren glanced at Hessa. She's going to be troubling, he said. Hessa watched her daughter walk away, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her expression. Yes, she said, I believe she will. And for the first time, that did not sound like a concern.